some of that was a surprise to me, not that it's not true, but I forgot some of that. It's kind of nice to hear. I also, before I begin, want to thank Andrea and Judy for making this possible, and John also for helping figure out how to make that work. Boy, that's amazing timing. There we go. Growing up in Nebraska, it was really frowned on to talk about yourself very much. So knowing that I'm going to be talking all about myself for the next hour is a little bit uncomfortable, although my wife would tell you that's what megalomaniacs do. And by the way, I should thank her too. The fact that I get to do what I love is entirely responsible for her, because she worked at a job that she did not like for a long time, so that I could get to do something that I love. So thank you. And since very few of you actually know her, I got to tell you too, all you need to know, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, she donated a kidney to a stranger. That only happens 3 times a year in the United States, so she's my hero. Okay. Okay, I started, at least I can remember drawing when I was about 3. My folks and later my brother were all bankers, so somebody interested in art kind of didn't fit the Pursley mold. Not that they weren't encouraging, they were very encouraging, but there wasn't any unlined paper in the house anywhere. Everything was notebook paper, but I would draw on that. But I didn't know, of course, about sketchbooks or drawing paper or any of that kind of stuff. So I drew on lined paper for quite a while, and then I found, when I pulled the inner sleeve out of one of my parents' record albums, it was 12 by 12 inches of either white or sometimes kind of tan paper. And so I would draw all over those and then slide them back in carefully. I still don't think my mom knows that I ever did that. And I suspect, I thought then, if it's not okay to draw on the walls that my parents own, it's not okay to draw on this, but it was kept secret. But my dad worked at a Chevy dealership, and periodically they had these cardboard broadsides, this one on the flag, and on the back of those was pure white light cardboard. And that was just a gift. He'd bring those home and I would draw or paint on them. That's the first that I have. That was done with the paints from a paint by number set that was left over. So that is the reverse side of the one that you just saw. And I would guess maybe I was 5 or 6 there. So very interested from an early age. I think I was 7 when I did this as a school project. Nebraska, of course, in the lead, beating Kansas and Iowa. And when I was 8 years old, I saw this ad in a Reader's Digest magazine for Continental Insurance Company. And I can remember just stopping on that page and looking at this illustration. It was so well done. And I knew it was painted. And it's the first time that I can remember thinking, somebody painted this and somebody got paid to do this. By the way, could we turn the lights out? You'll be able to see this, all these a little better, I think. And I was just transfixed by that. It was so impressive. And at that point, I started thinking, maybe I could do this. And it was so inspirational that by the time I was 13, I was hired to do some illustrations for the Lexington State Bank. It probably didn't hurt that my mom worked there too, but I used that ad to do this for the Lexington State Bank. That was on the front of the float and the back of the float. Either side was a centennial coin for Nebraska, and that's the parade was about the centennial.
I love your shorts.
Yeah, as you can see, I set fashion paces for the Midwest there. Yeah. By the time I was 18, actually I started this mural when I was 16 in high school, and it has to do with kind of a Revolutionary War theme with the Minuteman statue. We were the Lexington Minutemen, so that was appropriate. In the spirit of '76, on the far end, a clipper ship is kind of hard to see, Liberty Bell and Washington crossing the Delaware, and a much thinner version of me from 1972. 50 years later, I went back and visited the same spot again, and somehow my legs got shorter there too. Can I move that cursor? Can you do it? There you go, thank you. I saw a 30-minute film when I was a freshman in high school on Andrew Wyeth. I had never heard of him. He's an American artist, lived part of the time in Maine. And the detail was so incredible in this that it really fired me up. It was the most influential day in terms of art my whole life. I could see in this, and I've got a slide that's one of the pictures that was in that film, but it kept getting hung up, so I'll show you that at the very end. His paintings were so realistic, done with a small brush. I could see that a clean-shaven man, there was color where his beard would be. I had never considered that, never seen that in a painting, but you could do that. And the eye, you could tell there was a liquid film on the eye by the way he painted. Again, had never considered that. So it was like a quantum leap in my thinking from that point. So not too long after that, I started working in this hyper-real style, especially with pencil. So this is pencil. I think I was 19 when I did this. So like the hair up in the top, those aren't drawn. It's drawn on either side of it to make that the white paper. Well, I've got the pointer here. I can show you. Like right there. Those. And I tried to do every pore and every wrinkle, and it took forever. I really liked how it came out, and I'm still proud of it. But it's the process was really tedious, and I'll get into that more a little bit later. So that was my first year of college when I did that. Wow. By the summer between my second and third year, I was working part-time while I was a student at it was kind of like a 7-Eleven convenience store. And on the graveyard shift, we would have, every time during the graveyard shift, a couple policemen would come in, make sure everything was all right. And on one of those times, that day in the newspaper, by the way, this is Colorado State University. That day in the newspaper, there was a composite drawing of a criminal, and I knew there is no way that this guy looks like this unless he's been in a serious accident and his face was not proportioned. There were just so many things wrong with it. And I asked these policemen, who does your police composite drawings? And they said, well, it's just a guy that's got drawing for a hobby, he doesn't really have any training. And I said, could I try for that job? And they gave me the name of the chief of detectives, so I went down and took a portfolio of work, and I could not read this guy. He did not seem particularly interested, but he said, well, maybe we'll give you a call. And about 4:20 in the morning, a couple weeks later, after a Der Wiener Schnitzel got held up, they called me, and I went down to the police station. I'm still trying to wake up, and they lead me into a room where the clerk that had been held up was, and the clerk looked at me and he said, he looked just like you. Except not so tall. So for the first one that I ever did, I did a self-portrait and just put a stocking cap on it. And I remember the next day, as I'm walking across campus, a patrol car goes by and I think, there's a copy of my drawing in there. And then I realized there's a drawing of me in there. So I did that. It started out for the Fort Collins police in Colorado, and then it gradually spread to the sheriff's office and a bunch of other communities in northern Colorado, and occasionally if there was a bank robbery or something, we could do that for the FBI too. So this is one of the examples. We do it from the witness or victim description. The other one that I'll show you is the hardest job that I ever had to do. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. I won't go into a lot of detail on it. But I did not do this from a description of a witness or victim, because this is the victim. They didn't know who she was, but she had been brutally murdered. And what also made this tough, they were doing the autopsy at the same time I was trying to essentially put her face back together. And it was really, I had to keep thinking that this is just a biology lesson, just get this done. Ended up, by the way, that her husband killed her stabbed and slashed her 33 times with a pocket knife. You can see here the detail kept going. I wanted to get away from pencil and into paint, but I was really nervous about doing that. I wanted to keep that detail, and I didn't know how to do that until I thought, well, maybe I could do it with watercolor, a really fine brush. So essentially I was drawing with watercolor paint, and I could keep some of those fine lines. And again, it was really tedious. Eventually, I moved to oil paint. This is way bigger than the original. The original is probably maybe that size. But again, a really tiny brush. The headlight took 6 hours to do, just every little tiny detail. By 1983, I was working for the Orange County Register newspaper in California. We moved from Colorado. Taught 1 year. I was an art teacher for 7 years, 6 in Colorado, 1 in Wyoming, and then moved to California. I had gone through college wanting to be an illustrator, and again, it goes back to that Revolutionary War soldier in that ad. I wanted mainly to be an illustrator, and I knew I probably should have a backup, so that's why I got a teaching degree too. But teaching in Colorado and Wyoming was not going to get me freelance artwork or illustration jobs to speak of. So I had to either move to New York or California. And I felt like I've had enough of snow in Nebraska, so in Colorado, so I moved to, that's funny now living in New Hampshire. I moved to California, and I was taking a portfolio to anybody that would see me, and so I could get some extra freelance work. And one of those jobs took me to the Orange County Register newspaper. I sat down with the art director, and after 30 minutes, I got up, shook his hand to go, and he said, "You are here about the job opening we got, right?" And I said, "Didn't know you had an opening." So that started 23 years as an illustrator with the paper, and it was really a terrific job. I got to work with some tremendous people and got to illustrate for sports, or the one with the lady in the red dress is actually a garden guide. Getting Away, you may recognize that's Big Eddie there, and the Swiftwater Bridge, and the wine and food section could be anything, usually except the front page, but occasionally, as I got better at portraits, if somebody important died or was not doing well, they would say, "Craig, we need you to do a picture of this entertainer or political figure or whatever." And it made our paper look a little better because every other paper in the country was putting pictures, photographs of that person. We were the only one that I knew of that actually had an illustration. It meant some tough deadlines. When Jimmy Stewart passed away, I found out at 11:30 in the morning that I needed to do an illustration that needed to be being printed at 10:30 at night. So it wasn't always easy, but great opportunities at this. And this is an example of a series that I did called Dreamscape, and they gave me complete control. I was so happy with this. I would do whatever painting that I wanted, and oftentimes they were surreal like this. I would give it a title and a caption. In this case, the title was The Colorado Quicksand Divers, and you can see that there's a guy diving into the quicksand through this hoop there, and blindfolded. And the caption was something like, "I knew that I was next, and yet I was surprised when they called my name," being this guy, who happens to be my son sitting next to my daughter. So I use my kids and my family and friends a lot of times in those illustrations, and oftentimes I would throw in something I didn't tell you, the purpose of this was a writing contest. So Dreamscape, there was about 40 of these over several years. The readers would see the painting, read the caption, read the title, and make up their own story and send those stories in. So a month later, we would print the 5 best stories. They could be vastly different. Some could be funny, some tragic, some surreal, everywhere in between. Just the variety was great, but they all worked with those 3 clues, so to speak. And sometimes I would throw in something like this little logo, and LNP, it says under there. The logo, by the way, is something that I came up with when I was in grade school. When a teacher was saying something that didn't interest me, I started putting my name every letter of my name on top of the next one. So first and last name, everything together makes that little logo look kind of like a stocking cap or something kind of threatening. LMP, readers had lunar military police, all different kinds of stuff. It's actually Laura Michelle Pursley, that's my daughter's name. But that was kind of fun stuff to do. While I was working at the newspaper, it was, we worked 10-hour days, 4 days a week, so that gave me 3 days off. So I started getting into doing baseball illustrations. And before I get to this one, I'll tell you that we were in Orange County where the California Angels played. And as a fan, I was already doing baseball paintings just on my free time. And I wanted to see if I could work for the Angels on call. And several times I would call, I'd always get transferred to the same guy who would say, well, we don't really use illustration. You can send in something if you want, but we'll probably just file it. So, in 1989, the All-Star game was played in Anaheim. And for the paper, I pitched this idea, how about if we have a poster on the back of the sports section to do this? And they went for it, and we needed to find out who was going to be in that game, and they said, we'll call the Equitable Life Insurance, who at that time was sponsoring this. And when they found out we were doing this, they said, well, maybe we'll make this poster and give it out to the first 45,000 fans at the game or something. So, yeah, I was all for that. So I did this illustration, they printed it, and because of this, they allowed me to go to the banquet the night before, where I'm sitting, any baseball fans in here? Okay, so I'm sitting across from Eddie Matthews and Ernie Banks having dinner. A couple tables over is Joe DiMaggio. There was 28 Hall of Famers there. And I made some of these, or had made on some 200 on better paper. And number one, you can see number one of 200 there. I had all of those guys sign it. So, so Joe DiMaggio's in there somewhere. There he is. I'll eventually get this right. Joe DiMaggio. And yeah, it was just terrific. These guys were all my boyhood heroes. Some actually before I was born. So terrific experience. And that kind of led to a lot of other things. At that game, it was so hard to sit there. Again, being from Nebraska, I wanted to tell everybody, I painted that. But I just kept that to myself. But my brother-in-law, Julie's brother, started telling other people. And by the end of the game, outside the stadium, there was a lot of people wanting it to be signed, including one 12-year-old, that's not him. But her brother said, hey, this is the guy that painted that. And just keep in mind, he's like 12. He looks at me and said, you painted that? I said, yeah. Let me see your driver's license. So my name's on there. So once that was done, then he was okay with me.
Oh, that's good.
This was the most fun that I did. This was done for a program cover for the Angels. It was actually...
So you got hired by the Angels?
What's that?
If you ever said that you got hired by the Angels after that, right?
Oh, yes, thank you. That poster, once that was done, I took it in to show this guy that I'd been calling who turned me down so many times, and he saw the work, and he said, where have you been? I've been trying to find somebody like you for years. Anyway, so for the decade of the 90s, pretty much any illustration that was done, I did for the Angels. So this is Lance Parrish, who was their catcher then. We set this up at the stadium, but it was during the off season. I think it was February. He was nice enough to drive from his home, get completely suited up. I was standing on a very tall ladder. I invited a whole bunch of friends and family to come for this, and I had an agreement with 20 to 24 of them, and about half of them showed up. So I had to move some people around and do them twice. By the way, there's a cable that ran over this, and I took a baseball, put it in a net, tied it to a rope, and threw it over so the baseball would hang there. That way, everybody's eyes are going to one point. If I had just said, hey, everybody look up like there's a foul ball, they'd have been all over the place. So, this is Julie. That's Julie as a blonde. That's Julie. That's Julie. This is Julie's leg back here. That's her sister, who is also here. This guy is also a black guy over here. This is my son there, and it's called, the painting's called The Spectator. It took about 100 hours, which is, I think, the longest that I've ever spent on a painting, and it's pretty good size. It's called The Spectator, and it seems obvious that this guy, he's not going to be able to get out of the way of this. He's either going to get hit, or people are going to hit him going for it. But for me, The Spectator is Norman Rockwell up here. Tucked in the corner. He was my first art hero. That led then to working for Upper Deck. They took over the sponsorship of the Old Timers games, and instead of having one poster done, they had one done for every stadium and an Old Timers game in every stadium for a few years. So I did about 50 paintings for Upper Deck over the next 2.5 years. So Carl Yastrzemski in the middle, and some of those other guys who baseball fans would recognize, Tony Canigliaro and Dick Williams. Also, as part of the Angels retirement ceremony for Nolan Ryan, they let me donate a painting to him. Those are, those are actual numbers that are sewn onto jerseys. It's adhered to the canvas. I took some of the dirt from the pitcher's mound and mixed it in with the paint here. And about the time this picture was taken, I told him, you're going to take a picture or piece of Anaheim pitcher's mound home with you. So that was really terrific. And I'll tell you, when I did this, there was 20-some thousand fans in the stadium, and I was so honored to be a part of this, and probably a little full of myself. And when I sat down from this, I was just on cloud nine. The next guy to the podium was the Angels owner, Gene Autry. Even if you're not a baseball fan, you know Gene Autry. And he then gave Nolan Ryan a big pickup truck and a silver saddle. So the painting crashing too fast. And I won't tell you the whole story, but I found out years later, he donated this to an auction for a community college girls program. They did not tell anybody that he owned it, or that it was part of the ceremony, or that the Angels spent $300 on the frame, and somebody got this for $45.
Oh, wow. Tell him you got that project. Show him.
Okay. I was a huge Nolan Ryan fan. I painted him more than anybody, and at one point I counted the paintings I had of Nolan Ryan, and there were a little over 60. And he was still playing then, and he's still playing here. He was with the Texas Rangers, and they came to town. And I asked one of the people that I worked with the Angels, can I show him these? And they had a third dressing room, and they said you can set him up in there, and we'll see if he wants to come in. So he did come in. He was pretty stoic and quiet. By that time, he was such a megastar that he was different than 3 or 4 years earlier when I met him, when he was much more outgoing. So I had a one-man show of paintings of one man with that one man, with 60 of them. I probably came across as a stalker or something with 60 paintings. This whole talk is kind of one thing leading to another. So when I'm doing this, I get a sports publication and I see that Ted Williams is going to be opening his own Hall of Fame in Florida, or museum, excuse me. And in it, he's got a Hitters Hall of Fame. He picked the 20 best hitters, in his opinion, ever in baseball, excluded himself, which was incredibly generous, I thought. But when I heard that, I called that museum and I said, would you like 20 paintings of those guys? And he was excited about that, the director. I was excited about it. During the conversation, I realized that he thought I meant I was donating 20 paintings. I thought he was hiring me to do 20 paintings. But we worked it out that I got to keep the originals. They printed them and used that, and then I could sell or trade the originals of a painting that was in his museum. So it worked out really well. That's the only one that I still have left. Shoeless Joe Jackson, and the one from that series of Hank Aaron is now in the Baseball Hall of Fame. That was the hardest deadline that I ever had. I was still working with the Orange County Register. I had to do 20 paintings in 22 days, and still, again, I was working 4 days a week, but made the deadline. Working for a newspaper was really good for deadline pushers, but that was the toughest. Also, while I was working for the newspaper, we heard Ronald Reagan was failing. At that point, Orange County was kind of the last bastion of conservative thought in California. And so I pitched the idea, how about on the back, we were doing a special section, a tribute to Ronald Reagan. How about if we do this big illustration, and they went for it. So I did this, and it's 8 feet by 8 feet, and it is made of 256 little squares, each individually painted. And they're painted separately. You can see here, there's 6 at the top, 6 at the bottom. So when I would mix for one, I would intentionally not do any of them that were going to be adjoining it. I would wait until another day. So I would mix paint slightly different. So things are going to sometimes not quite line up and not quite be the same color, but close enough that when you're back away, it all comes together. So once that ran, shortly after he passed away, then we donated this to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, and that's the director on the right-hand side. So it's there today. Also, there's pictures of him. That's in the flag behind him, the wrinkles of the flag from when he's playing football. He may have been playing football there too when he was governor or an actor. Had pictures of Nancy that were all part of that, but you don't notice it until you're up close. All right, again, still at the Register. This is 1986. Chuck Yeager came out with his biography, and I had to do got to do the illustration that would accompany our book review of that. And one of the terrific things about working for a newspaper is they could get anybody's address. And so when this was done, I thought, well, maybe I'll send it to him and see if he'll autograph it, which he did. Got it back with a nice signature on it. And that started me thinking, maybe I could do others. So it started out with mostly aviation people. This is Jimmy Doolittle, who was an air racer in the 30s, later general, commanded the U.S. 8th Air Force in Europe, and came up with the attack on Tokyo, bombing in April of 1942. So you can see the signature is a little shaky there. He was in his 90s by this time, but got that. And then it went to entertainment figures, and we've got Gene Kelly and Jimmy Stewart, and one even back to a silent actress, Lillian Gish, was in, can't remember the name of that. Then it went to baseball, and that's when it really took hold. And so, you know, my boyhood heroes again, none bigger than Mickey Mantle. And at one point I had every living Hall of Famer signature on a drawing or painting, and still have a bunch of those. And then eventually to other artists that I admire. This is somebody most of you, probably all of you, don't know. Ray Kinsler he dropped out of school at 15 years to be an illustrator. And he started illustrating comic books and then pulp fiction novels, a lot of Western and detective kind of stories. And then he starts doing serious portraits, and eventually ended up painting 7 US presidents and had tremendous stories to tell. I can remember seeing, I think it was in a Boy's Life magazine when I was a kid, there was an ad for Ray Kinsler's art school or something, and he looked so intimidating. So when I got to meet him, he was kind of a big deal in the Portrait Society of America, which I joined in 2010, and got to meet him at that conference. And I was so nervous because of this intimidation from when I was 10 years old. Couldn't have been a nicer guy. He signed this, he said, "You've caught my inner beauty." Thanks for that. So that's his face, but it's me from the neck down, my hand. And that's him with it there. He passed away maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And he believed, and the Portrait Society believes in mentoring. So that's Ray on the left. His main mentor, Michael Shane Neal, who's painted 6 or 7 U.S. senators in the U.S. Capitol building, painted Sandra Day O'Connor, Supreme Court Justice, and then a young lady that I'm mentoring. So there's kind of 4 generations of mentoring, although I'm older than the guy who's mentoring me. But it all works. I'm a big believer in mentoring. And anybody, I know one in here at least knows John Singer Sargent. Anybody ever heard that name?
Yes.
All right. I am a huge John Singer Sargent fan, and almost anybody that paints realistically, especially people, he's their number one guy. He probably died, I think, in 1925 or thereabouts. Ray Kinsler was taught by a guy that learned from Sargent. So add two to that, and that's a direct chain, and it goes on. So something that I'm proud of. That's the young lady in the picture, a painting that I did of her. And that's a drawing that she did of Sargent.
Yeah.
This is a pretty amazing story. This used to hang in the Bath Public Library. It's Daniel Webster. I used to go into the library and admire it when we first got here. It was up on top of a bookshelf. It was in good shape. It was very dirty. Did not have a frame, but it had this kind of liner on it. And then one time I went in, actually 2 or 3 times in a row, and saw that they moved it from where it was safe to leaning against the bookshelf on the floor. And they had so many kids programs in there that I knew somebody's going to put their foot through this, and they can't afford to repair it. So fortunately for me, they were trying to raise money for a computer and some other equipment. So I went to the library board and I said, I would like to buy this painting from you and clean it. I'll frame it, and if you agree to it, I'll share it with you 6 months in the library, 6 months at my house. And hoping they would go for it. And I told them, what I'm offering to pay you is much less than it's worth, I'm sure. But they went for it immediately. So I thought they would say, well, let's talk about that, and we'll let you know in 3 weeks. Honestly, they didn't even talk about it, just the director said, done. So I wrote her a check, I took it home, and they found, you will not, no matter how close you look, even if I had the original here, you might not see the tiniest signature along his lapel there of any painting that I've ever seen. And it was during the cleaning that I saw this. And research came through Google, I found out that it was a guy who had grown up in Piermont, failed at everything that he tried to do until he realized he was pretty good at art. And eventually he ends up with his own studio in Boston, where no doubt he painted Webster, actually painted him at least 3 times that I know. Both were dead by 1856, so I'm guessing this is about 1850 that this was done. Also in that Google search on the artist, I found that he had 20 aunts, uncles, and cousins that lived in Bath. One of them made Morrison's Old English liniment, which this is. That was made in what's now the ice cream shop next to the brick store. Our art gallery is just the other side of it. One of his cousins made that, and there's still an ad you can faintly see on the north end of the brick store and the back of the brick store for Morrison's Old English liniment and Lady Poor's ointment. So I thought that's as close as we'd ever get to knowing anything about this. But the librarian called me 3 years later and said, Craig, I was going through some old paperwork and I thought you'd be interested in this. From a 1916 annual library report, it says this: a very nice portrait of Daniel Webster was donated to the library by Mrs. Lucia Ross. It looks very nice on the walls. The librarian could not see all the hair on my neck and arms standing up because we live in Lucia Ross's house. So that painting used to hang in our house, went across the river to the library for hundreds of years when I came back.
Don't tell them how
Crazy.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you came. During the cleaning process, people ask, what do you use to clean an oil painting? And it's called oil painting cleaning solution. And you have to do it, it's very much like nail polish remover, smells exactly like it. There's the same kind of Vestine acetone base, evaporates really fast. So you dip a Q-tip in that and then rub a little circle about the size of a quarter, and gradually you'll see that tip start to stain, usually kind of gray-brown. If you rub too long, it starts taking paint off. Just right will just take the grit and the smoke, the cigar smoke, and the soot from fireplaces that this would have been in for years. So it cleaned up really nice. I've got some pictures. That's me cleaning it. You can see his cheek is still pretty brown. The rest of it is cleaned around there. And here, right down the middle, I cleaned it half and half just so I could get this kind of before and after picture. But it came back really nice. But I didn't keep track of the hours, but it was 750 Q-tips that it took to clean. And that's it. Actually, mine is on the left. One of the other ones that the same artist did is on the right. They were exactly the same, and the third one is exactly the same too. And I won't go into why that is, but if anybody's interested afterwards, I'll be glad to tell you. We have the American Heritage Gallery of Art, 2 doors down from the brick store, where I sit in this 100-year-old buggy and paint. Most people think it's a sleigh because a buggy without wheels looks like a sleigh. But fixed it up, built the easel into it, so I get to look out and see what's happening in town, which since the brick store closed is pretty much nothing. But it's a great place to paint and like doing that. That's what it looked like when I got it at an auction. That guy you know, probably everybody nearly in here knows Ray Burton. When we moved here, I kept hearing about this Ray Burton character and how amazing he was. And the stories I was hearing of how things would get done were so impressive that and this is not an exaggeration, I wondered, does this guy have mafia ties that he can get done so fast? But as I got to know him, and by the way, he called me by name the second time he saw me, and there was at least 3 or 4 weeks in between. So I'm sure everybody in here that knew him has 3 or 4 Ray Burton stories. But so anyway, for his service, I wanted to paint him mostly for my portfolio, but I wanted to give him this just to say thanks to, and I included Bath in the painting there. That's the church where he played organ for years and years, and he drove through the covered bridge to and from every day. And when I gave him this was during his annual summer picnic, he graciously accepted that, but it was so much like Ray Burton that where he had it displayed was behind an open door in his living room. So you had to close that door to see the painting. So he was not particularly a vain guy. Now it is behind his desk in the State Capitol building, and they tell me it will always be behind that desk, which is a perfect place. I'm very happy to hear that. Again, one thing leading to another. We owned our house in Bath 3 years before we moved there. It was a wreck, needed to have a lot done. One of the guys that we hired to do that was Carl Nystrom. And Carl is still a friend. I found out he was a big Civil War fan and was willing to trade portraits of Civil War generals for work. So he's got 10 or 12 portraits. At one point, and it was news in 2012, this guy, who was a former state senator, was going through the State Capitol building and where they have paintings of every governor New Hampshire's ever had, including colonial governors. And he saw the painting that was there of Governor Keyes and knew that's not Governor Keyes. His grandparents were friends of Governor Keyes, who was governor from 1917 to 1919, died in 1935. So he took that painting off the wall and into the chambers and said, this is not Governor Keyes, we need to fix this. And so he took it on himself, or was assigned the task of finding what the real governor looked like, and he was able to find Fran Keidel, who lives in North Haverhill. She's the granddaughter of Governor Keyes. And as the senator is talking to her, and we need to rectify this, do you know anybody that could paint this? Carl is working on her house in the next room and overhears this. Carl comes in and says, I know somebody that can do that. The senator told me later, he's thinking, okay, a guy who's fixing the wall in the next room knows an artist who's going to do this. But Carl brought some paintings to the next show, and they came up to the gallery, and by the end of the day, I had the job. So this was during the unveiling in the State House for that, so it's also in the State House. And that's a closer view of it. By the way, we had no color pictures of him, but his wife was an accomplished author who was actually more famous than he was. And she wrote such a vivid description of him with his ruddy skin and pale forehead and the color of his eyes that it was not so hard to do. Okay, I mentioned we've got a gallery, and this is the bridge between the gallery on the far side, our house on the near side, and you may remember they were doing some repairs to the bridge that finished in 2014, and I could not get across that bridge. They would not let me walk across that bridge. So we live 300 yards from the gallery. It's a nice walk. But for 22 months, although the gallery's not open year-round, I had to drive to Woodsville and back around to a place we can see from our living room. So instead of 300 yards, it became a 22-mile round trip to get to work or to pick up our mail. So whenever I could, I swam across. And kept a baggie, a sealed baggie with the keys clenched in my mouth, and I would swim across. So unless the river was too high or conditions were threatening, I would just swim across. And Julie got this picture, which proves I've reached the age where I can no longer be embarrassed. And you can see the work being done on the bridge back there. I've often said every painting tells a story. In fact, I had a show at Alumni Hall a few years ago that was the title, Every Painting Tells a Story. Here's an example that this was originally done in an earlier version for the newspaper. I redid it maybe 5 years ago. So the story that this accompanied was the dreams of pregnant women. And there was a survey, extensive survey, and they found out there were things that regularly occurred. For example, lots of water, which isn't too surprising, lots of water. And in the first trimester, cute little furry creatures. Wait a minute, I'm wrong. Whoop, oh gosh, I figured this out. Little sea creatures or amphibians in the first trimester. Second trimester is cute little furry animals. Third trimester is threatening furry animals. Leaning towers was another one. Containers of any kind, whether it's a closet or something like that. So water everywhere. That's actually Julie diving on her honeymoon in the Bahamas. And this is a local girl. The original one I did was not her, but and it's really interesting. I had this on display one time, and another artist came up who said, "My gosh, this is my dreams." And she was 4 months pregnant. She did not know the story. This is another one, and I'll try and tell this one quick. This is the most extensive story. I grew up hearing this cautionary tale from my dad, who lived in southwest Nebraska, where there was a severe accident. So the story was always, you look twice before you cross the railroad tracks. And I heard that so many times that many years later, I actually went back and researched that. And by this time, Google had come around. So I found that this was a story that was covered in national news for 2 or 3 days. So the story is, this family, there's 10 in the family, 7 kids, parents, and the mother's mother, the kid's grandmother, all living in one house. They are getting ready to go to an evening service at church. They have just finished dinner and are starting to clear the table. The mom says, "We're running late, we don't have time, just leave it, we'll get it when we come back." So everybody 10 people pile into a car that's a little smaller than a Model A. There's only 2 seats. So the mother and father were in the front seat, 10-year-old son in the middle, 3-year-old son on the mother's lap. In back, the grandmother and 2 oldest kids each have one of the 3 youngest girls on their lap. In their hurry, they get to the railroad tracks and are hit by a train. The train, by the way, you can't see it here, but it says 309 is the number on the train because it was March 9th when this happened. Everybody in the back seat was killed. The 10-year-old boy in front was thought to be dead until they saw him move. They had to put the survivors and those that were killed on the train that hit them to get to the fastest way to get to the hospital. The 3-year-old had a head injury, and according to one newspaper article I read, was not expected to live through the night. The parents were both sedated or unconscious long enough that by the time they were aware, their kids and her mom were already buried. 5 kids and her mom. So that's why there's these broken roses, the survivors. She's holding one. The amazing thing about this story is there's so many times if a couple loses one child, it'll destroy the marriage. This is 5 and her mother. It was the father's fault. There's no way to get around it. Either he didn't look or he thought he could beat that train. But she forgave him for that. And the next year, she's pregnant again, and she decides to call that baby Joy, because she's not going to be identified for life by that accident. And I'm sure for the rest of her life, they lived in the same town, people her age knew that's the one that lost her whole family, or so much of her family. When they came back from the hospital, her brother brought them home, they crossed over those same tracks again. It had to be so painful to do that. Opened the door, and the table's still set for dinner. And she does those dishes, and it was just extremely hard. But as she cried, put those away, each one represented one of her kids and her mom. And that was kind of her memorial service, since they didn't get to see what was the biggest funeral in that town ever, and remains that. So this is called Choosing Joy. This painting is called Choosing Joy. That actually is that spot in the railroad tracks. She is standing on where that car was hit, right there. And I'll tell you, the 3-year-old boy that wasn't expected to live through the night, grew up, married a local beauty, had 2 sons, and I'm the youngest. That was my grandmother. So that's why I did that research, and why Dad was so adamant about that. Still like to be an illustrator, and this Angel of Dunkirk in theaters summer 2024. There's no movie like this. I just wanted to paint this and have this terrific model, who I'll tell you a little bit more about as we go. Here's another one, the same model. This is another movie, The Torch Singer, that's also not going to be out now or anytime. But I like to still do illustrations sometime. This model I found, Julie and I went to a play in White River Junction years ago, and she was taking tickets and had exactly the smile that I was looking for a painting I wanted to do. She had never modeled before, but was willing to try that, and was instantly so good. And everything over the next 7 years that I wanted to paint that she would work for, she just absolutely nailed. And so by a couple of years ago, I had painted her 100 times, and this book came out, Painting Hannah, 100 Works of a Single Subject, and all kinds of different things in there. I've got a copy of that up here. When we're done, if you want to come up and look at that. I've also got a book of the dreamscapes and another one of the faces, and 3 books that I've written there if you want to look at those. The books on the paintings, they're the only ones I've got, so handle them gently if you would, please. So now, anyway, I'm up to 128 or 29 of Hannah. And once I'd done 100, then this magazine, International Artist, was interested in a story on painting one person 100 times. So, and that was a goal for about 35 years for me, to be on the cover of a major art magazine. So that one made me really happy. That was summer before last. I mentioned I still like illustration. This is not mine, but it's a great example. This composition where your eye goes leading into her, all of this leads to her face. It's just such a beautiful composition, and was done by a guy named Tom Lovell, and I bought a book of his illustrations. Later, he was a fine artist. As I'm going through that book, I see this painting. Wow. So I never knew the name until I got this book, and it was like 50 years later. And so I went on eBay and found an ad from, I don't know how long ago, probably the early 60s, mid-60s, bought that, and so that ad is now in my studio at home, just as a reminder of that early inspiration. So I'm going to go through these next few here kind of quickly, and then I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about them. Once the brick store closed down, it was almost, and still, it's almost a ghost town out in front of the gallery. And it was getting a little depressing. But right about that time, 2 sisters came in, very interested in art, and I started mentoring them. And then another, and another, and another. So I am now mentoring these 5 kids. This is a trip that we took to Boston Museum of Fine Art last year to a Sargent show. That's a Sargent painting behind them. So left to right, it's Monique, her sister, Genevieve, me, Landon Cohen, who's here. Thank you for coming. And Bella. This has been so rewarding for me. It couldn't have come at a better time when things were kind of depressing in Bath. to work with these kids. And I'll tell you, they aren't just interested in art. I taught school, as I said, for 7 years in a much bigger community in northern Colorado. In those 7 years, I had 2 kids that I would consider talented. Gifted is well above that. Somebody said one time, I'll equate this with genius, so the quote is genius, but talented is being able to hit a target that others can't hit. Genius is hitting a target others can't see. And these kids are gifted. 5 kids gifted in such a small area of population, all so close to Bath. I still cannot get over that. So I'll go back through them. These last 5 are the kids' work, not mine. This one's Cohen's. That one's Genevieve's. That was at the fair and won first place a couple of years ago. That's Bella. She's 13. All these kids are 13 to 17 when we went to the museum. That's Monique's. And that's Landon's. It's just phenomenal. These kids are so far ahead of where I was at that age. It's just really exciting, and they're good kids. So I'm having more fun as a teacher now with those 5 kids than I did 7 years with the whole bunch. So that's the Andrew Wyeth painting, one of them that was so inspiring. The whole system kept getting locked up, but we had to put it at the end so you could see it. So that's what I had to say. If you guys have questions, we can turn the lights back on, and I'll be glad to answer anything. Are you still awake? Yes.
Was Don Mattingly in one of those?
Yeah. Do you have that card?
No, but I recognize he didn't mention his name.
Oh, he wasn't in any of these.
Oh, he wasn't?
No.
Oh,
No. I did a bowling card for him as an insert card in 1990. Yes?
From your police drawings, were they able to find?
Yeah, that was one of the really rewarding things. It was, like I say, sometimes a tough job. And I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. There was a lady whose husband had just been shot 5 times in the head. She asked me, "Do you think he'll be all right?"
Oh.
And it's hard to be encouraging. I was sure he would die. Ended up that he not only survived, he was fine, except he lost vision in one eye.
Wow.
That was a really tremendous, interesting case, which had international repercussions because it was a hit that was put on by Muammar Gaddafi against a Libyan student who was outspoken at Colorado State University. And when Reagan found out that connection, the next day he froze all Libyan assets in America. That was kind of the last straw. That wasn't a direct answer to your question. What was your question again?
Were they able to identify the
Oh.
perpetrators?
Yes, it was so nice of them. Oftentimes, they would send me a copy of my drawing and a copy of a mugshot after an arrest was made. And I have to tell you, I won't say entirely due to the witness or victim, but if their memory wasn't good or they couldn't describe it well, there was no hope. So it was always mainly to their credit that this came out when they did. Now, that was very rewarding to know that somebody was in jail that should be. Yes?
did that model you drew 100 times, did she ever have a career modeling?
She did a little modeling after that, but not a lot. She sure could, and some of that, I didn't really go into it. Wasn't just her face. It was how this stance that I'm giving, this is called contraplosive. Everybody can do this until they're asked to do it, and then suddenly they're very stiff. And most of the people that I ask to pose, maybe a waitress somewhere, or brings me ice cream in an ice cream shop, or I run into them at a grocery store or wherever. So they've never modeled before, and they're very nervous and tight. And I will ask them, "Can you hold your hand like that?" Almost none can. And she did without being asked. And it was just so exciting to see that hair on my arm stood up when I saw her do that. Yes, somebody gets it. And just, any look, if you look through the book here of the 100 paintings, you'll see her as a cowgirl and as a ringmaster at a circus, an aviatrix, all kinds kinds of things. Ben Patel, Hollywood starlet kind of thing, just tons of looks. And she nailed them all. And a terrific lady. She was very good at also contributing. So sometimes she would say, well, how about if we do this pose? And it'd be better than what I was thinking. So it was great working with her. She and her husband moved to Maine a year or two ago. She came back for a photo session last summer, and I took 2,600 new photos of her, so I should be able to paint her for the rest of my life. Lots of inspiration. And again, I'll start and end with thank you to my wife that I could paint somebody 120 times, and she gets that. You know, I'm not in love with her. I really love painting her. But I'm not in love with her. Yes?
I'm curious as to why, and I think I can explain it, why you painted your wife in the painting so many different times as different characters.
Because
you said that's what I
That was the baseball one.
Oh, why did I? Because I didn't want empty seats, and not all the people showed up that were supposed to.
But why couldn't you just paint something out of your head rather than?
Because my paintings out of my head don't look nearly as good as if I've got reference. Reference, I really need reference. If somebody can paint out of their head, and I'd say I've known two in my whole career that can paint something really good out of their head. My head doesn't show how shadows are going to fall, and how detailed. So I can get the proportions right. That would be fine. But little details and lighting would not. By the way, one of those two is 15-year-old Cohen sitting in back. He can do that. Anything else?
When is your gallery open?
Oh, thank you for that. I forgot to tell you something else. Normally, it's first weekend of May, but Julie and I are going to be gone for too much of May, so by the start of June, I'll be there 5 days a week. I'm usually gone Monday and Tuesday. But that also reminded me that every other year I have a show of paintings of local people at Alumni Hall in Haverhill, and that's coming up this year. Mine will open July 13th, and if anybody is interested, you are very welcome to come to the opening of that. They have refreshments. There's usually about 35 paintings. And the thing that's really fun is that as many of the models as I can will be there, so you get to see the real person with their paintings. And I also have forgotten, and I don't know how much interest this will be, but this one is just started. So it kind of gives you an idea of some of the process. And you're welcome to come up and look at this closer. But this will be in a frame in that show, so you'll see it early and then finished if you want to. Also, after the next show at Alumni Hall after mine is those 5 kids. They're going to have a show of their own there, so you'll be able to see more of Cohen's work and those other 4 kids. And I really hope you will attend that. You'll just be amazed. I'm hoping to get some news coverage for that too.
What about costumes? You have such a variety. Where do you get them?
Mostly on eBay, almost entirely on eBay. And I have, we've got a huge attic which looks like a hoarder lives there because there's so many things that I've collected over 50 years. I don't throw a lot away, and thank you, Julie, for not piping up right there. But yeah, I've got a lot of military costumes and different outfits for models, and still getting. I used something last year in a painting that I had for 50 years without using it, but I know if I throw something away, I'm going to need it the next week if I've had it 50 years. Yes?
Do you have a favorite painting?
If our house was on fire and I could only grab one, it would probably be that one, The Spectator, with Julie and my sons in there, and yeah, it would probably be that one. Yes?
I'm fascinated with your shirt. Is it a Western style?
Yeah, this is called a bib front shirt.
Right.
And these were the first uniforms for baseball players because it's what firemen used to wear, and firemen were often the first baseball teams in towns in the Midwest and stuff. So both firemen and later, some people call it a John Wayne shirt, which that's not gonna confuse anybody with me wearing it, but, yeah, good front strip.
So you already know, Craig is also a fabulous storyteller, but they're all true stories. And when Craig came in the other day to look at the museum, he remarked on the ancient ball that was the sign for the tavern and taught me something I didn't know. Would you please tell them, because I love that story.
Could you grab it so they see?
I can't lift that.
Is it heavy?
Yeah, no, don't
John?
lift it.
Don't hurt yourself, I didn't know it was heavy.
It probably weighs 40 pounds.
Well, do you want somebody to help you?
No, he can do it.
Okay. All right, so
If you hear a scream,
this was, what's the name of the tavern again?
The Young Cobley Tavern.
Okay, do you guys know
yes.
where we're talking about? The big gray building on the straight line, is that what they call it? Yeah, that was a tavern going way, way, way back. And taverns or stagecoach stops, if you want, you can put that here on the table.
I was supposed to model it.
Yeah, okay. Go on. At stagecoach stops in the early 1800s, maybe before that, they would have a post out there and a cable or a rope hanging, and then one of these balls would be hanging from that. And if a stagecoach was coming and this ball was up high, they would know that there's nobody at the tavern that needs to be picked up by your stagecoach. And if nobody on the stagecoach needed to stop, stagecoach could go right through. If this is lowered, it means please stop, we've got somebody here. So that carries over to today, and truckers still use the term when they can shoot right through, called highballing, because the ball is up high.
I love that.
By the way, there's a name on this, that's Ross, who ran the tavern, and his house, he was also the first station agent for the railroad station in Bath, lived right behind it, which is on the southern end of our property. So that guy lived on our property, and his son built our house and had a painting of Daniel Webster in it.
Thank you.
So thank you for doing that. And you thought that was before 1824 or something?
Oh, yes, definitely. Because they were leasing it before 1824.
Okay. Yeah, I was so excited. I've never seen one, so I'm so excited the other day to see that. Yeah, cool.
this can't hang it because it's too big.
I know, it was very heavy. We can't hang it because it's so heavy.
We're gonna hang it, but we're gonna get up into the attic, up into the timbers to have something strong to hang in, and we'll have it on a chain. Right now, it's just sitting on the floor in here.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? You gotta know that in about an hour. All right, well, thank you very, very much again. We've got a